hi everyone. Welcome to Pilot Training Connect podcast by AFM.Aero. I am Paula Abanes and with me today is Maximilian Buerger, Managing Director of AFM. So this is our first ever LinkedIn Live interview and our first interview for this year. Thanks to everyone listening right now and to everyone who will listen on our YouTube channel, Google Podcast, and Spotify. So let us welcome Max from AFM. What are your predictions for the pilot training industry in 2023?
Okay, perfect. I think this is really what most of you kind of joined this LinkedIn Live and this podcast for. So we just prepared a couple of few slides to share with you our high-level thoughts of how we see things, of how we predict things will develop in 2023. So I think the first good starting point of it is to really look at where are we today in terms of the demand for air travel and airlines in terms of their capacity. So looking at different kind of sources of information, as for example IATA, in November of 2022, the global air travel revenue passenger kilometers was approximately at 75% of November 2019 levels. So this is more on the kind of demand and passenger side. And then if we look at the capacity, so airline capacity, which is deployed, we took this data from OAG, which we highly recommend following both of these sources of information. And if we look at the seat capacity deployed by airlines globally, we're also still around 10% compared to 2019 figures in that specific week. So we can estimate we're at around 80 to 90% of 2019 air travel figures, depending on which metric you look at, depending if you're looking at domestic operations, international operations, different regions of the world. But let's say we're around 80 to 90% or 80 to 90% of where we were in 2019. So what are the implications of us of the air travel industry being at approximately 80 to 90% of 2019 figures? Well, the first thing that we look at is the airline pilot demand. And if we look at the airline pilot demand, what we're predicting for 2023 is we're really predicting a surge in demand for cadet pilots. If we look back at 2022, 2022 was really focused, the airlines were really focused on the rehiring of their existing pilots that they might have let go in the pandemic or that are, let's call it, within their network. So what we saw from maybe Q2 of 2022 until end of Q3, start of Q4, there was really kind of the massive rehiring drive by the airlines. Towards the end of 2022, we started to notice a lot of the different airlines around the globe starting to open the application windows for new first officers or for cadet pilots. So specifically towards the end of Q3 of last year, we saw a very large number of airlines from Australia to UK to throughout Europe and some parts of Asia really kind of open up their application windows for new first officers. Now, as we're going into 2023, we are starting to see more and more, we like to think of it as poaching of flight instructors, but it could also be termed as that, more and more flight instructors are starting to leave flight training organizations to go to airlines. And we'll touch a bit more on that in a moment. So for this year, we're really predicting that as the airlines have rehired a large number of the experienced pilots, as they've rehired or as they've hired a large number of let's call it for experienced first officers or individuals who have the commercial pilot license already since some time. They've continually been hired and kind of absorbed in operations, and the market has kind of been, they've absorbed kind of whatever was available in the market. Now in 2023, as there are less and less qualified pilots open to work in the marketplace, once again, I would like to make a note that this really varies on a region by region basis. But we're predicting that more and more flight instructors will start leaving flight training organizations to go to the airlines, and that we actually predict that 2023 or possibly 2024 is going to be a record year for airline cadetship programs. So a lot of people, when they look back, they saw 2019 kind of being a year when a large number of airlines around the globe started or announced cadet programs. We think 2023, but latest 2024, is going to break those records. We are already tracking airline cadet programs, and I'll share with you in a moment kind of some of the data that we're putting together for anyone who's interested in it. But these two things in terms of airline pilot demand are really kind of where we see the demand drivers are going to be. You know, taking flight instructors from existing schools and then signing up new cadet programs. We're also expecting to see more funding programs being offered by airlines. So we are already tracking that at AFM, and we can see it in different parts of the globe where airlines are coming back to cadet programs, and more and more of which are not self-funded programs anymore, but are either fully funded or partially funded. We think that we're most probably going to see an increasing model, an increasing trend, which is going to be very similar to the Air Baltic program, where within an airline cadet program, applicants or individuals might be funding the PPL stage of the pilot training, and then following PPL, the rest of it will be financed by the airline. So we've already seen this with 2 different airlines, and we expect that model to really kind of gain momentum. For this year, for 2023, we believe that airlines and schools are going to announce a lot of cadet programs, but that the real tricky situation is going to be 2024. And this view is also mirrored by the Eurowings Chief Operating Officer, which just a couple of weeks ago also mentioned that they see a big risk of the availability of new pilots in 2024, just due to the nature of how many new aspiring pilots enrolled in pilot training or in flight training in 2020, 2021, and then the first half of 2022. Because of the training cycle, the output of that will really come out in 2023, 2024. So, not many individuals signed up in 2021. So in 2020, there were still a lot of kind of students in the system who signed up in 2020 and the beginning of 2020, in 2019 and the beginning of 2020. But then in 2021, in a large part of the different regions across the globe, there weren't that many student pilots who started their training, and the output of that, will be seen, let's call it 1 to 2 years down the line. So we're kind of following this wave, and 2024 is really going to be the interesting year where A lot of airlines might even announce, or we predict a lot of airlines announcing cadet programs this year. But even anyone starting a cadet program this year, the output of it, they would only see, in end of 2024, 2025. So we feel that 2024 is going to be a really interesting year in terms of kind of this misbalance of demand and supply. So the first thing, as I said, that we look at is airline demand for pilots. The second thing is, okay, since we know what the demand is, how about the supply? So, and at the supply level, we're looking at training capacity. And for the training capacity, we really view the industry as kind of like this wave, which goes through these booms and bust cycles, being led by the airlines and closely followed by simulator training centers, and then flight schools being around 6 to 12 months behind the development of this wave compared to these two other segments of the industry. We know that air travel is recovering very quickly. We know that airlines are recovering extremely quickly. If we look at simulator training centers, we know as well that simulator training centers around the world are doing very well at the moment, for the most part. Not all, but for the most part. An example of this is we know that, especially for Airbus A320, a large number of simulator training center operators are seeing record utilization, full utilization of their assets across a large part of the globe. And we believe that in 2023, the demand for full flight simulator training capacity will remain very high, especially on specific types like A320 and 737 MAX. And whereas 2022 was really focused on a lot of recurrency, a lot of airlines bringing back bringing back experienced pilots and putting them onto the full flight simulators again, we feel that towards the middle, already now, but more going towards the middle of the year, a lot of the full flight simulator training demand is going to come from new CPL holders who need to get type rated, and a type rating being quite a intensive, hour-intensive program, that this will continue to keep the demand for full flight simulator training capacity quite high for 2023 on specific types. We know that there's quite a few initiatives by different players across the globe to add more simulator capacity, so to add more full flight simulators. But one of the things that we think that needs to be carefully studied is we believe that there could be a scenario where actually one of the constraints for the utilization of this equipment will not be having the equipment, not be having the full flight simulators, but might be the constraint of the flight training industry not being able to produce enough commercial pilot license holders to kind of go and do their type rating. But once again, I would like to mention this greatly varies from region to region across the globe. We're just looking to give a very high level overview of what we're seeing across the globe. If we look at the training capacity of the flight training industry, as I mentioned, we feel that the flight training industry is around, in terms of this recovery wave, is around 6 to 12 months behind airlines and simulator training centers recovery. Based on all of our research, we also know that the global flight training capacity has significantly decreased due to the pandemic, and the full effect of this is not yet visible. So we know that in some countries, we've seen 30–40% reduction in flight training capacity. In other regions, we've seen an increase in flight training capacity. But if we look at all the flight schools across the globe, we estimate around 25% reduction in in the ability of flight schools to produce new commercial pilot license holders and airline pilots. Of course, there are exceptions, as you have anywhere, but from a large kind of macro view, this is how we're seeing it. In terms of the demand for training capacity, and specifically flight training capacity, it's also very important to note that a very large number of players of flight training organizations are not in a position financially or personnel wise to ramp up. So they've been through two and a half, three very challenging years. And so even though there's a significant increase in the demand for flight training capacity, we believe that a very large part of the flight training industry just does not have the resources to be able to meet that demand. Training aircraft availability is also a key obstacle to the growth of operations, and that is due to a number of things which I'll go into a bit more depth later on. But we are seeing that especially well-known brand flight schools are seeing record B2C and B2B student intakes. So we know of flight schools right across the world who have gone from barely any student enrollments to now having the largest student enrollments that they've had on record, where it's 30, 40 students per month per intake batch, all the way up to, we know, training organizations who are taking in 80 aspiring pilots per month. That demand is currently still heavily driven by the B2C segment, but we believe, especially in 2023, a lot more airline contracts are going to come on top of that as well. Due to this demand for more flight training capacity, but due to the limitations of for example, training aircraft and training aircraft delivery dates, we are seeing an increasing number of flight schools who are taking a record number of students, evaluating acquisitions as a possible way to boost their capacity. Because to add more training aircraft is fairly difficult at this time, and one of the simpler ways, if a flight school is taking in a large number of students on a monthly basis, building kind of that training capacity demand pipeline, is to evaluate potential acquisitions. So our predictions for 2023 is that we're going to see an increasing consolidation within the industry, and a significant increase in mergers and acquisitions, where kind of larger brands will look to acquire flight training capacity in order to meet demand that they have. So the first thing that we really wanted to show is, okay, what do we believe on a very high level is the airline demand for new first officers and for cadet pilots, and then kind of how this demand will be addressed from a supply infrastructure side. When we're looking at the supply infrastructure side, I think one of the key predictions that we have for 2023, and which is something which we have been actually highlighting on AFM even since the end of 2021, is what we're seeing right now is an increase in the demand for flight training capacity, or for flight training itself, but at the same time, we are seeing not necessarily the same increase in the capacity to deliver that training if we're looking at it from a global level. And one of the key things that we've kind of predicted since more than a year now, but which is really starting to grip quite heavily, is instructor shortage. So what we're seeing right now is some flight schools, some well-known brands are taking in record number of students, but then at the same time, they're also seeing much more flight instructors leaving their system, and especially the experienced flight instructors. So this is kind of, we're moving into two opposite directions unless flight schools train enough flight instructors to kind of conduct and meet the demand that there is. We're seeing increased poaching by airlines of instructors. So from TKIs, theoretical knowledge instructors, to certified flight instructors or flight instructors, to SFIs as well on the simulator training side. Last year, we started to see bonuses being offered, first for captains, then for first officers. Now, actually, since the end of last year, we started to see sign-on bonuses starting to be offered to SFIs, synthetic flight instructors. So on the simulator training side, there's some organizations around the world who are offering $10,000 to $20,000 sign-on bonus for SFIs to conduct a full flight simulator training. We think we might start seeing the same, or it might go all the way down to the flight school level, where specifically for experienced flight instructors or chief flight instructors, we might start seeing kind of such packages being offered. And once again, we heavily look at the different regions across the world and then kind of take this global view, but we're already seeing in two kind of key regions around the globe, flight instructors being increasingly poached and the salaries of flight instructors just skyrocketing. So this is really the point that I want to mention. I think the cost of flight instructors is going to dramatically increase in 2023 in a large number of regions across the globe. I think flight schools, when they examine the risk and when they examine their staffing for 2023, flight instructors and instructors in general should be at the top of their agenda. Last year, we started to see, and this is also publicly available information and is covered on AFM, we started to see airline CEOs state publicly that they are overhiring by 20% on specific pilot positions, because they know that the poaching and that the churn is just so high at the moment. And so I don't know how, or we have a good idea of how different flight schools are tackling this flight instructor staffing component, but this is really a key operational risk that we see for 2023. To give you all an example, 2 months ago or so, we got a request from a flight instructor who was asking for information on where they could do their Airbus A320 type rating for a specific country. And then when we shared, when we pointed him to AFM and shared some information with him, we found out that it was actually him and 7 other flight instructor colleagues of his who were all just waiting for a slot in one of the simulator training centers to do their type rating to then apply to the airlines. So one can imagine that if all of these flight instructors resign in one go to go and do their type rating, how it will cripple a flight training operation. And we've seen this now in a number of different countries and with a number of different organizations. We really feel that in 2023, the success of flight school operations will heavily depend on the flight instructor staffing strategy, in terms of the retention of flight instructors, in terms of the total package that there is, because once some of the airlines come knocking on the door, or speak to the different flight instructors, the packages that some of the airlines are offering, it's very hard to resist. Over the past few months, we've received calls from flight training industry leaders in a certain part of the globe where they were so worried about their ability to deliver flight training in 2023 because they had the low-cost carriers and regional operators from another country come to that specific country and offer the experienced flight instructors, but also kind of flight instructors which had around like 750 to 1,000 hours of experience, significant increase in salary packages and significant sign-on bonuses. And so it's very hard for, it might be very hard for flight instructors to resist this. And we feel that this instructor shortage is really going to drive the success or failure of a lot of the different flight training organizations around the world. And that specifically airline contracts are going to gravitate towards where flight training capacity is. And that will be heavily driven by the available aircraft, but even more importantly, on the availability of flight instructors. If we look at some of the geographical hotspots for flight training, so before the pandemic, there were, I think everyone knows kind of what the most popular places were for flight training across the world. We think that now coming out of the pandemic, things have changed slightly, and we really feel that countries which have flight instructor supply or favorable work immigration systems policies are going to be the one to watch. So some of the previous global flight training destinations, some of them are facing extreme complexities at the moment to get back to their old strong position. So I'm not going to go into detail which countries these are, but there's some countries where the flight training capacity is significantly less, and where the current demand for new first officers, for example, there's one country where the current demand for new first officers from the local operators is greater than all of the flight instructors within the country. There's another previously very popular pilot destination, flight training destination for international students for airline contracts across the globe, which is battling constantly with having enough flight instructors because North America, and specifically the US, is poaching experienced flight instructors from that destination. At AFM, we believe that the United States is going to do fairly well with its 1,500-hour rule, having enough flight instructors being able to absorb a large amount of the demand for flight training. We also think that Canada is going to do relatively well. We already started seeing it last year, and it was already very popular before the pandemic, and we feel they might even enhance their position as a global flight training hotspot. And then some of the countries in Southern Europe or kind of countries within Europe which have not or very specific policies towards visa and work policies of kind of international aspiring pilots, which then become student pilots, which then become commercial pilots and flight instructors. A couple of countries to watch from our end, which we will watch closely in 2023 and which we can recommend, is Philippines and Thailand. So both these countries have an ample supply of flight instructors. Both these countries have a lot of flight training capacity. And both these countries have airlines where the demand for new pilots is not as strong as in some other regions of the world. I know both of these countries have a lot of potential, but also a lot of complexities. But we feel that in 2023, these two countries could emerge or could quickly scale to become like part of the global hotspots for pilot training. Some other hotspots, which I think everyone knows for flight training across the globe, is New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, and a couple of other places. But for us, kind of what we're really kind of watching closely is these markets where we see a lot of potential in terms of growth. Lastly, I want to share with you all some of the risks that we're seeing within the pilot training industry, and specifically within the flight training industry. The first thing is financial sustainability of flight schools. So we have tracked and we know that the cost of training delivery has significantly increased over the past, let's call it 9 months. But the prices for pilot training courses has not kept pace with the increase of cost. And having the discussion with different flight school leaders from across the globe, it is really difficult for them to adjust their pricing, or at least it was in 2022, because they also feel that if they increase their pricing, then aspiring pilots might go to another flight school down the road. So kind of everyone kind of held back from the pricing increases. Plus, the cost of flight training is already very expensive to begin with. We also see a risk that flight schools, they come out of the pandemic for the most part in a weak balance sheet position, so in a weak financial position. A large number, not all. There are of course exceptions. There are some schools which have done very well, but looking at kind of the wider industry, we see that the number of flight schools have very weak balance sheets at the moment, which number one, do not allow them to scale, and then number two, also make it very difficult for them to absorb the increase of cost. We are expecting, and we're already seeing it, a buildup of deferred revenue training liability. So there's an item which sits on the balance sheet of flight schools, and what this essentially means is flight schools taking in funds from student pilots and then having to deliver that training, but potentially some of these funds already being used for current operations or growth initiatives or something like that. So we expect a large number of flight schools to see an increase of that, which once again weakens the balance sheet. So that's definitely something to look at. We see and we predict that at least for the next 6 months, there's going to be an increase in continued increase in interest rates to kind of tame inflation. And this is an additional risk factor for student financing because it makes it more expensive for students, aspiring pilots, to take out student loans for flight training financing. Makes it more expensive, makes people very much reconsider it. And then also high interest rates also make it more expensive for flight schools to kind of borrow money for capacity growth initiatives, be it the buying of aircraft or any other initiative. So in terms of these specific risks from financial sustainability standpoint, we do predict that more airlines and OEMs will increasingly look to enter the flight training segment again. Going into the pandemic, I know a lot of airlines exited the space, but airlines, a large number of airlines across the world is in a are performing well financially and might look to enter. And we predict that an increasing number of them will again enter the flight training space. At AFM, we are tracking these. we put out a lot of this information to our premium members as well. And off the top of my head, I can think of 4 airlines which have entered the flight school, the flight training space within the last year. And we predict an increase of that. The reason for that is they will view it as as a secured pipeline of pilots, and for them, if the flight school, let's say, runs at a financial loss, it's easier for an airline, especially a larger airline, to absorb than it is for a private entity. The second risk that we feel that we're going to start seeing emerge in 2023 is delayed training. So a large number of flight schools, once again, not all, are taking in more students than their capacity. The demand is phenomenal across some parts of the world, and we feel that some flight schools are taking in more students than they have capacity for, and especially when we look at kind of metrics like flight instructor to student ratio or aircraft to student ratio, we're seeing that increase on a month-by-month basis. And what that potentially could result in is the timeline delivery that flight schools have given to students or airlines in terms of the training of these pilots could be, and most likely will be, extended, especially as flight schools have challenges in terms of some flight schools, or a large number of flight schools have challenges in terms of kind of growing their capacity again to meet the demand for flight training. So as the delivery, as the duration of training increases, what we could start seeing, certainly not in the first half of 2023, maybe not even in the second half, but towards the end of 2023, that we could potentially see a trend where flight training students start shifting flight training provider due to the duration of training just becoming too long, and that could both be airline contracts or the B2B space. What I want to share with all of you lastly is at AFM, we cover a lot of industry updates of the things that I've just mentioned. And I just want to highlight a few things which might be of interest to some of you watching or listening. We just recently put out a pilot training industry relevant events calendar for the year. So we're continuously updating that. So for anyone who's interested to know what are potentially events that they could attend, please go visit AFM, and we're listing the events that at least we know of there. If you have any events that you know of, please share them with us. We are also tracking the deployment of full flight simulators. So we've just finished, end of last week, a timeline of all full flight simulator deployments in 2022. So once again, anyone who is a premium member with us, please let us know. We'll share it with you. It's on AFM already. And anyone who isn't a premium member, please let us know, and we can discuss how you can get access to it. We are also tracking, as I mentioned, cadet programs, airline cadet programs, and airlines moving into the flight training segment. So we're just finalizing it this week, but we will also have the complete timeline for all that at least we can track airline cadet program announcements for 2022. And then if there's any flight schools listening, what we've also done is we've kind of reviewed some of the social media metrics of flight schools across the different social media channels. So if you're looking for benchmarks in terms of the different social media platforms that are used, who is doing very well in them, what are the latest trends, please do let us know. We cover it on AFM. And over the next couple of weeks, we have a couple of other similar surveys, similar reports coming out, not in regards to social media, but other metrics and aspects of the flight training space. That's it from my side. And once again, apologies for starting late. I thank you all for listening and for watching. And yeah, please do let us know if you have any questions or if you would like to learn more about our subscriptions or activities.